Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA predictions for UFC 139, Shogun versus Henderson. This event will take place live on November 19th from San Jose, California, and it will feature 5 main card fights, which I'll be giving predictions for, along with 7 preliminary fights for a total of 12 predictions, my largest prediction show to date. UFC on Fox has not happened yet as the taping of this show, so nothing to report there with the tournament, but UFC 139 will be the middle event of our 3 events in the second round of our prediction tournament. We have whittled the tournament down from 32 competitors down to the Sweet 16. The winners will be looking to advance to the Elite 8, so please get your picks in as soon as possible. As always, Kamikaze Overdrive is sponsored by MMABettingOdds.com. It's a fantastic website. Please check them out. Some very cool options and a lot of support if you look to get that edge in your MMA betting. Secondly, Sports Interaction is the official betting site of Kamikaze Overdrive. Please check that site out. It's fantastic. Just recently for the UFC on Fox event, they've added a new edition. Other sites have been doing it for a while, but this is Sports Interaction continuing to make advances. They've added the ability to bet on the fight of the night. So between that and your options to fight on the distance, how long fights go, obviously the outcome, how fights will turn out with regard to knockout, submission, decision, and you can parlay these events together, these betting options together. Sports Interaction is quickly becoming one of the best sites on the internet to bet on MMA, and definitely check them out. Give them a chance if you have, whether you have a book or not, definitely worth a look. And as always, please give my rankings a look. Let me know what you think. Post your comments. And this is a big show, so let's get to my first set of predictions on the prelims. Alright, so we have 7 preliminary predictions. Let's kick it off with Shamar Bailey and Danny Castillo. Now, Castillo looked good in his UFC debut against Joe Stevenson, but considering the struggles Stevenson has had, it's not as big an accomplishment as people originally perceived it to be. Now, Shamar Bailey, he also had a tough time in his last outing against Evan Dunham. He went over 5 with his takedowns, but really it was a learning experience for the young fighter. Now, in this fight, Bailey's going to have a 4-inch reach advantage, and he should be able to use his wrestling in the same way Jacob Volkman did to control Castillo, so I'll take Bailey by decision. Up next, Matt Brown takes on Seth Baczynski. Matt Brown, he really saved his UFC career with a victory over John Howard in his last appearance, and he looked good doing so. Now, Baczynski, he returned to the company after being let go following a very controversial decision defeat against Brad Tavares. Since that fight, he's gone 3-0, including an impressive victory over Clay Harvinson in his return to the UFC. Matt Brown's a tough guy, but Baczynski will have far too many advantages both in size and overall skills. Brown has suffered 8 career submission defeats, including his last 3 defeats, while Baczynski has 9 of his 14 wins by submission, and overall, he is a proven finisher. I'll take Seth Baczynski by submission. Up next, Miguel Torres versus Nick Pace. In Torres' last UFC appearance, he struggled with the speed of Demetrius Johnson's wrestling, but when the fight got to the mat, Torres handled himself quite well, with many people thinking he did enough off his back to earn the victory. Now, Pace has gone 1-2 in his combined UFC WEC career, losing his last fight to Ivan Menjivar. Miguel will have an 8-inch reach advantage, and he will keep Pace on the outside when they are standing, and Torres will use the superior grappling if the fight does go to the ground. I'll take Miguel Torres by submission. Rafael Dos Anjos versus Gleison Tibau. This fight will give the winner a nice push in a division that has seen many of its top contenders recently defeated. They have 3 common UFC opponents in Jeremy Stephens, Tyson Griffin, and Terry Edom. Both defeated Edom. Dos Anjos lost the other 2 fights, while Tibau went 1-1, earning the win over Stephens. Both are BJJ black belts. I would give Tibau an edge because of his improved wrestling and size advantage. He is one of the biggest lightweights and should be able to outmuscle Dos Anjos in close. Further, his wrestling numbers are superior in almost every category, and he has done it against better competition. Dos Anjos has improved his striking, but Tibau is no slouch. I'll take Gleison Tibau by decision. Up next, Tom Lawlor against Chris Weidman in the middleweight division. Now, Weidman is considered as part of the future of the division, and so far he has looked very good with a 2-0 UFC record, including a nice win over the veteran Alessio Sakara. Tom Lawlor is 3-2 in the UFC, but he could very easily be 5-0. In his 2 defeats, he started off strong, doing a lot of damage with his hands, and had his opponent in serious trouble. Unfortunately, he couldn't maintain the pace, gassing and losing both fights. Weidman is one of the most decorated wrestlers in the company, and he has a solid submission game to back it up. The big question is, how will his chin hold up against power? Jesse Bongfeld hurt him with a high kick, but Weidman recovered. Lawlor appeared to have improved his endurance against Patrick Cote, and I like the success he had early against another high-level wrestler in Aaron Simpson. He is the best wrestler Weidman has faced in his young MMA career. This is an upset special. I'm going to take Tom Lawlor to defeat Chris Weidman by TKO. Next, Alex Soto versus Michael Macdonald. Now, this matchup pits together 2 rising bantamweight prospects that have a combined 20-1 record. Despite Soto being 7 years older than Macdonald, Macdonald has a significant experience advantage with twice as many fights. Soto has 2 knockout wins and 3 submissions in 7 bouts, so he is a finisher. But so is Macdonald, with 11 of his 13 wins not going the distance. In the footage I've seen of Soto, he is very aggressive, which can be positive, but it also creates openings for his opponents. He is making his UFC debut on short notice, which is tough, but he was training for another fight, so he should be in shape. I'll stick with the more reserved Macdonald. He wins this one by submission. Finally, Jason Brillz versus Ryan Bader. Now, this is a matchup of 2 wrestlers, both attempting to rebound from flash defeats in their last appearances. I anticipate that Bader's wrestling will be good enough to dictate where the fight goes, either keeping it standing or putting Brillz on his back where he won't be comfortable. Bader will be hungry to rebound from a fight that everyone expected him to win against Tito Ortiz, and I'll take Ryan Bader to defeat Jason Brillz by TKO. Those are my 7 preliminary predictions. Let's get to the main card. Kicking off the pay-per-view, we're in the light heavyweight division as the American Psycho Stephan Bonnar, 16-7, will clash with 11-2 Kyle King Boo Kingsbury. Bonner's riding a 2-fight winning streak, while Kingsbury has won 4 in a row. Now, Kingsbury's skill set is simple but effective. He has considerable power, as demonstrated in his 21-second knockout of Ricardo Romero. He uses a stiff left jab in addition to powerful straight punches and a heavy reliance on knee strikes from the clinch. He has been incorporating more wrestling, completing 14 of 27 takedowns in his combined meetings with Jared Hammond and Fabio Maldonado. Despite his reputation as a brawler, Stephan Bonnar has serious fighting accreditations, holding black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Taekwondo. In his last trip to the Octagon, he used his grappling skills to dominate Igor Pokrayets, completing 3 takedowns along with multiple dominant positions. He has 7 career submission victories and has never been submitted. Bonnar has battled the elite of the division, clashing with multiple heavyweight champions in Forrest Griffin twice, Lyoto Machida, Rashad Evans, and current champion John Jones. Stephan may have gone 0-5 in those meetings, but he went the distance 4 times, only suffering 1 stoppage as a result of a cut against Machida. Further cementing his reputation as a durable fighter, Bonnar is the last man to take John Jones the distance. Bonnar will incorporate a number of kicks, but his overall approach to striking is the bloodier, the better. Against Krzysztof Strosinski, he stood in the pocket and continually exchanged with his opponent both in the center of the cage and along the fence. Where Bonnar appears to get stronger as the fight progresses, Kyle Kingsbury has been shown to become vulnerable in the second half of his fights. In his last 3 decision victories, Kyle has gotten off to great starts but struggled to maintain his success. In those 3 bouts, he averaged 43 strikes in round 1, 28 in the second, and 20 in the third. Further, his ability to complete takedowns has a significant drop-off, completing 7 of 9 attempts in the 3 combined first rounds, while only managing to go 9 for 24 in rounds 2 and 3. I attribute this to 2 things. Kyle's striking is quite stiff, relying on power, which can be incredibly draining, and he has a heavily muscled physique. The Jared Hammond fight was a perfect example of this issue, as Hammond, who fights loose, was able to push bell to bell, while Kingsbury was noticeably fatigued and relied on his takedowns to solidify the win. Hammond did suffer a number of takedowns in that fight, but Kingsbury wasn't really able to do much with the position, struggling to keep Hammond on his back. I could see a similar scenario playing out against Stephan Bonnar, as Stephan was able to get up several times against John Jones after Jones took him down. Bonnar has an excellent chin. He's never been knocked out, as I said, suffering 2 TKOs because of cuts, but I expect his chin will be tested here. If he can survive the early onslaught of Kingsbury, I think that Stephan will be able to take control of this fight as his opponent gets tired. King Boo's striking has been aided by a 5-inch reach advantage in past fights. That won't be the case here, as Bonnar's reach is slightly longer, and I expect this will show up. Further, Bonnar being a BJJ black belt will make the ground less of an option for Kingsbury as he gets tired. So I will take Stephan Bonnar to win a war, defeating Kyle Kingsbury by decision. In the welterweight division, Rick the Horror Story, 13-4, will take on 17-5 Martin the Hitman Kampmann. Despite a lot of success in their respective UFC careers, both men are entering this fight off defeats. Now, this matchup is a pure contrast of styles. Martin Kampmann is a former Danish Thai boxing champion. He's at his best when he maintains distance, utilizing fluid footwork and crisp striking technique, especially with his counterpunching. Conversely, Rick Story is a powerful wrestler who thrives in furious exchanges against the cage and on the mat. Looking at Story first, in his last appearance, he found himself on the wrong end of a wrestling clinic as underdog Charlie Brenneman out-hustled Story and continually put him on his back. Prior to that fight, Story was the one outworking his opponents. Over his 6-fight winning streak, he completed 17 takedowns, averaging 3 per fight. Against Thiago Alves, he persistently used the cage to dictate the pace of the matchup, ducking under the Brazilian strikes and driving him into the wall. From this position, Rick would batter Alves with punches, attacking the head and body before dropping down for a takedown. On the mat, Story has devastating power and and has also shown submission capabilities, submitting Brian Foster with an arm triangle. What makes Story most effective is he doesn't allow his opponent to rest, constantly working and forcing him to defend. Martin Kampmann's best overall fight in the UFC was probably against Paulo Thiago. In that bout, he stuffed 8 of Thiago's 9 takedown attempts, used his reach to maintain distance, and countered Thiago's looping punches with crisp precision striking. Kampmann's ground game is underrated. He's a BJJ brown belt that has never been submitted, holding 6 submission wins, including 4 in the UFC. Against highly touted grappler Jake Shields, Martin held his own on the mat, and in Diego Sanchez, he showed his excellent takedown defense, stuffing 14 of 15 attempts. Now, as good as Martin was in those fights, we also saw his major weakness. As much as Kampmann thrives in a technical fight, he struggles when he's under pressure, especially with his back on the wall. Kampmann struggled to create separation against Shields, who forced him to continually defend takedown attempts along the cage. Now, Paul Daley used his striking power to maintain pressure, punishing Kampmann and eventually earning the knockout. Diego Sanchez combined these two strategies, attempting multiple takedowns along the wall and brawling with Kampmann in tight, hurting him several times. Now, Martin is talented and a tough competitor, but he has a bad habit of playing into his opponent's strengths. Against Shields, he attempted to go out and grapple with him, and against Daley, he chose to strike with him instead of taking him down. Rick Story's power and wrestling will take the success of Kampmann's past opponents and put it to another level. Story controlled a very strong welterweight in Thiago Alves, limiting his space for a full 3 rounds, and I wouldn't expect him to deviate from that game plan for this fight. Kampmann will be on the defensive from start to finish, needing to create separation, but simply unable to. Unless Martin can catch Story with a well-timed punch or submission, something no one's been able to do so far, he will be on the losing side in this one. My prediction is Rick Story to defeat Martin Kampmann by TKO. In the bantamweight division, 2 former WEC champions will meet as the California Kid, Uriah Faber, 25-5, will battle 10-1 Brian Brillz. Faber is looking to rebound from his title defeat against Dominic Cruz, while Brillz has won his first 2 UFC bouts after losing his title in his final WEC appearance, also against Dominic Cruz. Now, the winner of this fight could conceivably find themselves back in the cage with the bantamweight champion. Both men are talented strikers, but stylistically they are vastly different. Brian Brillz has a devastating right hand and the technique to back it up. At WEC 37, he defeated Will Ribeiro, a former member of the Brazilian Olympic boxing team, clearly getting the better of the striking exchanges. Brillz is a fantastic counter-striker, knocking out Miguel Torres with a counter right hand. He will use feints to force his opponent to react, which will create openings. When Brillz does engage, he uses the left jab to close the distance and pushes forward, attacking with a heavy set of combinations. Defensively, Brillz avoids 69% of his opponent's strikes. He has a calm demeanor even in the face of aggressive adversaries, and when he does get hit, he has a granite chin. Now, Uriah Faber will stand in front of his opponent using his speed to close the distance and mix up his strikes. Faber will attack with both single shots and short combinations when he gets in tight. Now, Faber doesn't have the longest reach, so speed is important when he closes the distance, and he did have a lot of success doing this against Cruz, landing 32% of his strikes. Faber has suffered 2 career knockouts, the most recent against Matt Brown, so his chin isn't perfect. But just like Brillz, he avoids over 60% of his opponent's strikes. I would give the edge to Brillz' striking based on power, technique, and his ability to counter-strike, especially when he's dealing with speed. Uriah Faber clearly has the edge in the wrestling, but Brian Brillz' skills shouldn't be discounted. He wrestled growing up, his takedown defense ranks him at 60%, and he has a BJJ brown belt with 6 of his 10 wins by submission. Cruz was successful taking Brillz down twice, but we really haven't seen the former champion on his back. Uriah Faber has explosive takedowns, and I anticipate that he'll be looking to put Brillz on the ground. Against Eddie Wineland, Faber struggled, going 0 for 6 in round 1 and then 2 for 5 in the following 2 rounds, and he didn't fare much better against Dominic Cruz, finishing 1 for 5 in the takedowns. Faber overall only completes 31% of his attempts. Conversely, Brillz completes 70% of his attempts, and Wineland did take Uriah down, so we could see Faber on his back in this fight as well. Both men recently fought Dominic Cruz and Takeya Mizugaki, but be careful with MMA math. Faber quickly dispatched Mizugaki while Brillz took him to decision, but don't look too much into that. Against Cruz, Brillz had the most success with his striking when Cruz was in front of him. When Cruz attacked from different angles is when we saw Brillz have issue. But this is something that Uriah Faber doesn't do. In fact, Faber's style of standing in front of his opponent and then jumping in will allow Brillz to both counter and aggressively attack with his reach advantage, allowing him to hit Faber before Uriah gets in range. I rank Brillz' ability to defend Faber's wrestling above Wineland's, so I anticipate that Faber will be able to get Brian down, but not with consistency. Brillz will win the striking exchanges. I hope he doesn't break his hand again. Either way, I'm going to take the odds and the underdog. I'll take Brian Brillz to defeat Uriah Faber by close decision. In the co-main event of the night, former Pride champion Wanderlei the Axe Murderer Silva, 33-11-1, will battle former Strikeforce champion and undefeated kickboxer 7-1 Cung Le. Le is making his UFC debut after winning his final appearance in Strikeforce, while Silva is returning after a brutal first-round knockout defeat against Chris Lieben. Now, before talking about what will transpire in the cage, there are a lot of questions surrounding this bout. First, how vulnerable is Silva's chin? Secondly, will it be Cung Le the fighter or Cung Le from Hollywood that steps inside the octagon? Will Silva fight technically or brawl and rush recklessly into another knockout? Will ring rust affect Le? And finally, will the prospect of retirement or being cut motivate Silva to a win? These are all good questions, and really your guess is as good as mine, so let's talk about what we do know. This is a significant step up in competition for Cung Le. Wanderlei has fought the biggest names in the business, while Kung's most high-profile fight came against an over-the-hill Frank Shamrock and a two-fight series with Scott Smith. This is an advantage for Silva, but in all reality I think it's kind of minimal. Both are strikers at their base. They have shown some grappling in the past, but it's not a big part of their game. Cung Le has solid takedown defense. Many have tried to take him down with little success, and he has used judo-style throws in the past. Now, Wanderlei is a BJJ black belt, but he only has 3 submission wins. One thing that could figure into this bout is Silva's ability to catch kicks. Multiple times against both Rich Franklin and Michael Bisping, Silva caught a kick and took his opponent down. If Silva was able to pull this off against Le, it would be a huge advantage. But even Silva has admitted in interviews that Le has the most dangerous kicks in MMA, so this could be easier said than done. Le has a sizable arsenal of kicks and throws them with incredible power. He will attack with them in succession or as a single strike. Le focuses on all areas of the body, and combined with the wide variety of strikes, it makes it quite difficult to defend against. His hands are also dangerous. He will employ them in combination with his kicks, and because his opponents are so fixated on his leg strikes, they aren't ready to defend his punches. In fact, he may do the majority of his damage with his kicks, but he finishes off his opponents with his hands, especially his right. Wanderlei Silva has 23 career knockouts. He is a vicious striker, but he has shown 2 different approaches. Against Keith Jardine, Rich Franklin, and Chris Lieben, Silva brawled with varying results. The Franklin fight went the distance, with Silva losing a decision. Wanderlei attacked Rich with aggressive flurries, lacking any technical methodology, and for the most part, Franklin avoided and countered. As we saw in the Jardine and Lieben fights, when Silva violently rushes forward, the fight can end at either end of the spectrum for the Axe Murderer. The other option is what we saw at UFC 110. Against Michael Bisping, Silva looked much more relaxed and countered against his opponent, mixing in his offensive attack in a much more calculated manner. Statistically, in this fight, compared to what Silva normally does, he had a lower striking accuracy, but he also took far less damage. Usually he is able to avoid 60% of his opponent's strikes, but against Michael Bisping, he was closer to 75%. Head-to-head, Silva will have a 5-inch reach advantage, but the kicks of Le will negate this. If Wanderlei tries to brawl with Kung, I expect the seasoned kickboxer will circle away and counter. If Wanderlei tries to keep the distance in exchange with his opponent, Cung Le will use his accurate kicks to pick him apart. Only once have we seen Le in trouble, which was at the end of the first Scott Smith fight, and that was a Le with questionable motivation, and I don't think this will be the case here. Statistically, Le takes significantly less damage, has a higher striking percentage, and in the end, he lands 5.18 strikes per minute compared to Wanderlei's 2.72. If Silva can rush Le and catch him with a right hand, he could score the knockout. But he could also get himself knocked out. Cung Le has more tools to win this fight and the skills to exploit Silva's faltering chin. I'll take Cung Le to defeat Wanderlei Silva by knockout. In the main event of the evening, light heavyweights Mauricio Shogun at 20-5, and the last man to hold the Strikeforce 205-pound title, Dan Henderson, 28-8, will meet. Henderson has won 3 in a row and 6 of his last 7, while Shogun rebounded from losing his title with a TKO win over Forrest Griffin. Now, these two legends of the sport will meet with the possibility of a shot at John Jones' UFC title on the line. At 40 years old, Dan Henderson is enjoying a career resurgence and has been doing it fighting some of the best talent in the world. Henderson's approach is simple but effective. He uses his wrestling to control his opponent and his big right hand, known as the H-bomb, to render them unconscious. Henderson has 13 career knockout victories, including 4 in a row, while never being stopped himself. Dan showed his unbelievable power when he became the first man to knock out Fedor Emelianenko while on the ground. While in his fights with Rafael Feijoa and Michael Bisping, Hendo scored knockouts with a more conventional overhand right. Against Bisping, Dan set it up with a low kick, forcing Bisping to react and leave himself open for the H-bomb. He made a similar attempt against Rich Franklin, landing the leg kick and narrowly missing Rich's chin. Along with his powerful 1-2, Hendo will use a Superman punch to close the distance. He will incorporate low kicks and the odd body kick. Dan always has his right hand coiled, leading with a left jab, sometimes doubling and tripling it up. Dan has a lot of success with this style, but he becomes a little one-dimensional, focusing too much on the H-bomb, making him very predictable. Shogun is anything but predictable, mixing up his strikes, using kicks, punches, and knees. Of his 20 career wins, 17 have come via knockout, including his last 5 victories over notable strikers like Lyoto Machida, Chuck Liddell, and Alistair Overeem. In his first meeting with Machida, Shogun had a lot of success with his leg kicks, leaving noticeable damage on Lyoto's body. I expect that Hua will use kicks in this bout in order to help maintain distance. Rich Franklin used body kicks when he fought Henderson, landing them frequently, but Dan has shown the ability to counter a kick with a big punch. Hua possesses his own powerful right hand. He will mix in a variety of punches to help set it up, and he will also use devastating knees from the tie clinch. Both men have a tendency to attack wildly, looking to catch their opponents in the rush, but Hua is the more technical striker when he wants to be. Shogun is going to have a slight reach advantage and should also possess a speed advantage over Henderson, which could play a big role in this fight. Dan is a world-class wrestler, and he has shown himself to be incredibly difficult to control both on the mat and in the clinch. He completed 4 of 6 takedown attempts against Franklin and 3 of 4 against the much bigger Fei Zhao, including perfectly reversing one of Fei Zhao's takedown attempts. Dan has dangerous ground and pound, but a limited submission resume, and he has been tapped out 3 times, all by BJJ black belts. Shogun has a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but his submission resume isn't any more impressive than Hendo's, with only 1 victory while having been submitted twice. Hua will use takedowns, completing 48% of his attempts, but the key to his grappling game is Hua's takedown defense. Ranking it at 40%, Hua's ability to stop a takedown isn't terrible, but having rewatched his UFC 93 fight against Mark Coleman, I have my concerns. Coleman was able to put Hua on the mat 7 times despite being extremely tired. Dan Henderson is in far better shape than Coleman, and even though Hua is solid off his back, I anticipate Dan having a lot of success on the ground. Cardio will also play a huge role in the outcome of this fight. Both men have had issues in the past, but I would give Dan the edge despite being the older fighter. Shogun will need to maintain distance and strike with Henderson, but Dan's granite chin will make it hard for Hua to score the knockout, and as the fight progresses, Mauricio will slow down even more, making it even harder. Taking note of the success that both John Jones and Forrest Griffin had, I expect Dan will use his wrestling to turn this fight into a grind and wear out his opponent. Shogun has only suffered 1 true TKO defeat in his career, but Henderson has the type of power to change that, especially if Hua gets tired. This is a 5-round fight, but I don't anticipate it going the distance. Dan Henderson will either catch Hua with the H-bomb or use his ground and pound to stop him. So my prediction is Dan Henderson to defeat Shogun Hua by knockout. Alright, welcome back to Kamikaze Countdown. I just want to talk about the UFC Lightweight division shortly. This division is gaining a lot of respect, but at the same time it's kind of becoming the division of lost opportunity. You look at Kenny Florian, a fighter who had a couple chances to win the title and couldn't get the job done. Gray Maynard had the champion hurt badly twice and could not finish him. And there's a whole list of fighters like George Soteropoulos, Anthony Pettis, Jim Miller, Melvin Gillard, and most recently Dennis Seaver, fighters that were a win or 2 away from a title shot and all suffered defeats, taking a step back. But this division yet is so stacked. We have guys like Donald Cerrone moving up the ranks quickly. He could be getting a title shot in the near future if he gets another win or 2. We have the Ben Henderson-Clay Guida fight to decide a new #1 contender. That's going to be an excellent fight. And, of course, we have Gilbert Melendez looking at the opportunity to come over from Strikeforce and fight for the title. But the way the lightweight division contenders have been dropping off, and Gilbert Melendez, you have to expect, could be overlooking Jorge Masvidal in that fight and looking at Frankie Edgar and getting all fired up about that matchup. Do not sleep on Masvidal. He could very well sneak in there and take that title away and really throw a wrench into the plans. Either way, the UFC lightweight division is very interesting and gaining a lot more notoriety, especially their champion Frankie Edgar. A lot of people giving him respect, a lot more respect than they were giving him before the Gray Maynard fight. And I think this division has got a lot of potential going forward to be one of the best, if not the best division out there in MMA today. Either way, Kamikaze Countdown. Thanks for watching. So those are my predictions for UFC 139. A little bit of a longer show, but when you have 12 fights, and this card is as stacked as we've seen in a long time, what do you expect? I'm calling a couple upsets. Brian Bowles, Tom Lawlor, I'm looking at you to get the job done. Make sure you check out Sports Interaction. MMABettingOdds.com, check them out as well. Get your picks in for our prediction tournament. I think that's enough from me. I get a little bit of a break now, as the next show is not for 2 weeks with the Ultimate Fighter finale. This has been Kamikaze Overdrive MMA predictions for UFC 139. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm out of here.